I'm John Friedman. I'm the Rabbi Emeritus here at Judea Reform. And so I'm going to begin by saying to Steve's beloved family, daughter Leah, her husband John, stepson Aaron, sisters Celia and Barbara, beloved father Joe, who shouldn't have to see this moment, and to Donna, beloved wife, who loved him, lit him up, cared for him. I say to you that I have conflicted feelings now. And I'm sad, and don't feel much like a celebration. Steve is up there listening, and he is saying, I vote for a celebration. I'm doing the best I can, Steve. Donna, Steve and I spoke one time about our childhoods, about the same epoch. And in those days, you collected things, baseball cards, stamps, and we both did. So in that spirit, I want to repeat to you that we have assembled nearly the entire set of Jewish life cycle events together: Brit Milah, Bar Mitzvah, Chuppah, wedding, and this is not one I wanted to add to our album. You adjured me when you honored me by asking me to remember Steve, that others would want to remember Steve in line after me and to be brief. And then you sent me these two articles, one from UNC, one from the News and Observer, with sufficient material for all of our speakers if we were going to repeat what was written in them. Those articles demonstrated that Steve assembled a life of great achievement, enough to fill 2 lifetimes. 7 books, positions at Harvard, Yale, and finally, UNC, valuable and essential psychological measurement tools, leadership of the farm, no doubt the pinnacle of his career, and probably a mean backhand, and scores of students he went out of his way to influence and help, and a world I'm sure he would like to think made better because he lived in it. I got to know Steve better when he got ill. I was the rabbi, together with Rabbi Bach sometimes, who would come over and speak with him and hear his thoughts about his illness, his life, how he anticipated his life would go now that he had contracted this terrible disease and death. And whenever he spoke about these topics, which were appropriate for the rabbi sitting across from you, he was completely even, very focused, very calm, unemotional, so far as I could tell. The thing was that Steve didn't like to spend a lot of time on that. He actually always turned the conversation back to me. You've probably been in Steve's presence and know that when you were with Steve, the spotlight was on you. He wanted to hear about whatever research I was doing, and is probably the only person whose eyes did not glaze over when I talked about 18th century German idealism and its influence on Judaism and Christianity and In his sermon Friday night, Rabbi Bach spoke about Hillel. I want to add one feature of the Talmud passage that he told us about, and that is the reason Rabbi Hillel always prevailed in his debates with Rabbi Shammai. Why was the halakha, Jewish law, always, except for a couple of instances, decided according to Rabbi Hillel? It's because Rabbi Hillel always cited others, even his opponents' opinions before his own. I think that's what made Rabbi Hillel great. It's what convinced the rabbis to decide according to him rather than Rabbi Shammai. Well, Steve was like Rabbi Hillel in that way. When you sat with him, it was you first. Steve had a certain Menschlichkeit, humanity, that evolved from his extraordinarily developed intellect. We all have great intellectual qualities that we never use. Steve used his, and it became a wonderful feature of his personality, this intellect and the kindness that came from it. My mom used to say that I should be a professor. I didn't want to be a professor. I always thought she watched Goodbye, Mr. Chips one too many times. But after getting to know Steve, I wonder whether she might have been right. Steve was the person who made you want to be like him. Whether he was serious or humorous, reflective or compassionate, analytical or loving, Steve was among the most fully human souls I've ever known. And I feel grateful to have had him briefly in my life. But, Steve, I'm sorry. I'm deeply sad to have lost you, and I'm not in the mood to celebrate too much. Now you have to imagine that I am Donna Kay, because I'm going to read something that Donna wrote to say farewell and to add another memory of Steve, a tribute from Donna. As many of you know, Steve and I had a wonderful marriage, albeit much too short. The only time we occasionally argued was when we were driving in the car together. You see, we had different driving styles. Steve was very assertive. One could even say aggressive, and thought using a turn signal was not an efficient use of his time. I, on the other hand, thought that indicating your intentions to fellow drivers while going over 70 miles an hour might be a good idea. Yet when Steve lost his ability to drive, he endured having to be a passenger with much more patience and grace than I could ever muster, particularly when he had to witness me take a 5-minute detour on the way home because I like to avoid making left-hand turns. And when he got his power wheelchair, instead of being despondent, he gleefully remarked, "I get to drive again." This is but one drop in an ocean of examples of how Steve handled his illness with inspiring grace and flexibility. It has been said that ALS is like death by 1,000 paper cuts. And while that is certainly true, I found that during my caring for Steve, my heart was lightened by the numerous and incredible acts of kindness and generosity by many of you here today. I want to deeply thank you for reminding me of the goodness in the world. It is your kindness, combined with the remarkable legacy of Steve's kindness, strength, selflessness, and generosity, that allows me to continue with my mantra. Given a terrible situation, I am very fortunate. Kohelet wrote, "The eye never has its fill of seeing. Young or old, those who depart this life never see enough of the world, never complete their task, never cherish their loved ones enough before they're called home. How they yearned for yet another respite from the final summons, and how we yearned to have them close to us for yet another challenge in our lives, yet another joy, yet another precious moment together. God, be now with those whose hearts are broken, because whenever parting comes, it comes too soon. Console them at this hour. Be near to them when light seems distant. Sustain them, O God, in this time of healing." Leida hi reshit. Birth is a beginning, and death a destination. But life is a journey, a going, a growing from stage to stage, from childhood to maturity and youth to age, from innocence to awareness and ignorance to knowing, from foolishness to discretion and then, perhaps, to wisdom, from weakness to strength, or strength to weakness, and often back again. From health to sickness, and back we pray to health again. From offense to forgiveness, from loneliness to love, from joy to gratitude, from pain to compassion, and grief to understanding, from fear to faith. From defeat to defeat to defeat, until, looking backward or ahead, we see that victory lies not at some high place along the way, but in having made the journey, stage by stage, a sacred pilgrimage. Birth is a beginning, and death a destination, but life is a journey, a sacred pilgrimage made stage by stage, from birth to death to life everlasting. What can we know of death, we who cannot understand life? We study the seed and the cell, but the power deep within them will always elude us. Though we cannot understand, we accept life as a gift of God. Yet death, we face with fear. But why fear? Death is a haven to the weary, a relief for the sorely afflicted. We are safe in death as in life. There is only the pain of the living as they recall shared loves and fear to die themselves. Calm us, O God, when we cry out in our fear and our grief. Turn us anew toward life. Awaken us to the warmth of human love that speaks to us of you. We shall fear no evil as we affirm your kingdom, your realm of life. We call now on Steve's sister, Barbara Bernstein.
On the November afternoon when I was born, it was cold and slightly overcast. My 10-year-old brother Steve surely took note of the clouds, as he has a great interest in weather. Reznick lore has it that when the news of my arrival came, he was out in our backyard, busy working, making a fort from scraps of wood. When he received the news that I was a girl instead of the brother he had so hoped for, he shrugged his disappointment, then immediately went right back to work. Earlier that day for lunch, our housekeeper, Ella Carter, had no doubt fixed him a bologna sandwich with mustard flattened, 2 dill pickles, and a glass of milk, as that was his daily lunch ritual back then. I've been told that at age 10, Steve was skinny, smart, hardworking, shy, kind, curious, and did not yet have a beard. As I grew up, Steve became my superhero. He would patiently interrupt his work to play with me. He would push me in my stroller, feed me, and constantly make me laugh. Every night, without fail, Steve would come tuck me in. Our nightly ritual began with him literally squishing me with the entirety of his weight. I'm slightly claustrophobic to this day. Then he would ask me all about my day and listen with the greatest intensity, as if it were the most important conversation in the whole world. Steve was my role model and protector, my entertainer, ally, my nurturer, my mentor. I know he provided the same for so many of you here today. As a teenager, Steve became occupied by his role in the high school marching band, his job at our parents' retail store, his love of music, and his myriad of very cool friends. Looking back, it's amazing to realize that Steve somehow managed to fully and beautifully connect to his kid sister. He made time for me. He made time for you. In his shortened life, he worked so hard and accomplished so much. Steve literally changed the world. But he always made time to love. 1 year ago, when Steve was deep into his battle with ALS, I wrote this poem and sent it to him and Donna. I imagine that when he read it, he welled up a little bit, archived the letter into some highly efficient system, and then went right back to work. The poem is called "I'll Need a Big Brother." If I must lose this body you live in and carry on into the future without it, what can I take of you? Can I hear you laugh as I imagine your witty comment, or know your wisdom when I need to? Can I carry the image of you in the sand, trotting in a slow circle before racing into the ocean? Can I own just one nugget of your genius, your curiosity, your calm? Can you keep me company as I grow old? I'm certain this will be enough, but just to be safe, circle back here when you can and fill me up with you. Hold me in your big brother arms when I need it most. Tuck me in sometime at night. And wherever you are going, let me stow away and come with you in my pink sleeping bag. My little sister soul will annoy you, amuse you, revere you, and you can be somebody's hero. I'll miss this body you live in. It's how I know you now. But as I watch it slowly fade away, I love what I can take of you because I'll need a big brother. We will all miss this body J. Stephen Reznick lived in. It's how we knew him. But as we say goodbye today, let's find the comfort in what we can take of him, because we're all going to need a little Steve.
Steve's beloved colleague, Peter Ornstein.
Steve Reznick was my close friend and colleague for more than 18 years. But in a sense, he was also my teacher, and I suspect that he was the teacher of many of the people who are gathered here to celebrate his life and keep fresh his memory. Many of us in this sanctuary, and still more around the world, are deeply in Steve's debt for the lessons that he taught us about cognition and development, about psychology and methodology, about the joys of service to the community, and about being a human being, about being a mensch. And over these last 3 very difficult years, Steve taught us much about dealing with adversity with grace, courage, and determination. As many of you know, names are particularly important in Judaism as keys to our individual and collective identity. There's a midrash, a rabbinic account, that indicates that we each receive 3 names within our lifetime. The name we are given by our parents, the name by which we are called by others, and most importantly, the name that we ourselves earn. Well, the name that I gave Steve Reznick, and that I would suggest that he had earned, was Stevie Wonder. The use of Stevie Wonder came about innocently enough. One day, shortly after Steve returned to Chapel Hill and joined our faculty, I was working with 2 graduate students who were my teaching assistants in a large child development class. We were looking at videotapes to sample to use in discussion sections that the students were teaching. And all of a sudden, there was an image of Steve on the screen in the midst of a very scholarly, but yet nonetheless accessible discussion of his research. And I remember saying quite spontaneously, "There's our Stevie Wonder. He's the new kid on the block in our department. There's our Stevie Wonder." Well, the nickname stuck, and he was Stevie Wonder from that point on, except when there was a need for greater formality, when he was Dr. Wonder on occasion, and then later Dean Wonder on occasion. And I think that the name stuck because it is so apt. It was so apt. Steve was a wonder in terms of his many insightful contributions to the literature in our field. He was a wonder in terms of the creativity that was on display as he worked on the development of important measurement tools. He was a wonder in terms of his extraordinary commitment to his students, undergraduates and graduate students alike. And he was a wonder in terms of his outstanding skills in working with colleagues on tasks that ranged from collaborative research projects to the mundane committee work that is needed to keep an academic unit moving forward. And Steve was a wonder in terms of his commitment to service. In this regard, he was everywhere. Steve made important contributions in the Department of Psychology, in the College of Arts and Sciences, and in the broader university community. But he played equally important leadership roles in just about every major organization in the field, including his pivotal role as the founding president of the Cognitive Development Society. And as many of you know, he was devoted, it's already been mentioned by Rabbi Friedman, to the Faculty Staff Recreation Association, known locally as the Forum, and he served for a record 10 years as its president. Last October in Columbus, Ohio, there was a celebration of the 16th anniversary of the founding of the Cognitive Development Society, and Steve was honored for his many contributions. In an evening gathering of the leadership of the society, I proposed the toast to our Dr. Wonder in the form of a Hebrew blessing that is said when we encounter a wonder of nature. And I'd like to repeat that blessing here today with a little context information for you. As most of you know, there are many blessings in the Jewish tradition. Almost everyone is familiar with the blessings that are recited over bread, over wine, and over candles. But there are other blessings that have to do with the basic senses. For example, some blessings involve taste, others involve smell, and others involve sound. But there's more. There's a blessing to be recited in the presence of a king. Maybe a chancellor would do, but a blessing that you recite in the presence of a king. And there's another blessing that you recite in the presence of a great scholar. Now that one would do for Steve, but the blessing that we're instructed to say when we see a wonder of nature seems even more appropriate. The rabbis talk about saying this blessing when we see lightning, shooting stars, high mountains, great deserts, a sunrise, or any other wonder of nature. Well, Steve Reznick, our Stevie Wonder, was a wonder of nature, and as such, we say, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, osei ma'aseh v'reishit. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who makes the work of creation, who makes the works of creation. And let us say Amen. And finally, let me close with a wish that we build on Steve's truly inspiring example. In the Jewish tradition, at times like this, we say, Zichrano livracha, may his memory be for a blessing. May Steve's memory be a blessing for him, and a blessing and inspiration for all of us who remain to carry on the work. Thank you.
Jed Ellison was one of Steve's scores of students. He will remember Steve for us now.
In the middle of the journey of our life, I came to myself in a dark wood where the direct way was lost. While I have nothing in common with Dante, except perhaps a penchant for the dramatic and the core of a romantic, we both had mentors that guided us to new lands and levels of understanding. I've been asked to offer remarks regarding Steve's influence as a mentor, and I would not, in good conscience, be able to speak in general about Steve's influence on all of his students and trainees, because I suspect that he impressed and touched them in unique ways. That said, I'm honored to provide a few remarks and a few thoughts on what Steve has done for me and what Steve meant and means to me. I arrived in Chapel Hill 10 years ago, but this aspect of the story starts slightly before then, before my arrival. I was living in Salt Lake City at the time. After a year of rejections into graduate programs, I thought it would be better to try to visit a few programs with a little bit more experience under my belt, try to get some face time with prospective mentors, thinking that might improve my chances. I spent a couple of days at Yale and meeting with various professors and researchers. On one of those days, I had lunch with a postdoctoral scholar who asked me the most important questions about what I wanted to do. He said, whose work excites you the most? Whose work do you find most compelling? And I gave him two names. And he said, well, do you want to work on those questions, or do you want to ask your own questions? Because both of those individuals were trained by Steve. And this was particularly salient to me. This individual had been an undergraduate research assistant with Steve for a semester while Steve was at Yale. And Steve had made an impression on this individual that would be carried through to me, and that's one reason that I ended up at graduate school in Chapel Hill. I'll never forget my first meeting with Steve. I flew to North Carolina immediately after an interview in New York City. It was my first interview for graduate school, and the interview in New York City was memorable in its own right. I arrived, and the first interview was with a senior level graduate school in a room where they conduct psychodynamic psychotherapy. And this individual thought it would be a good idea to initiate the interview with 60 seconds of silence. I think to determine how well I would handle the silence, or perhaps because she was a sociopath, probably the former. But needless to say, it was quite stressful. And so when I arrived in Chapel Hill, and my first meeting was with Steve in the morning, and And I'll always remember, he said, the first question when I entered his office was whether I arrived in time to catch the Carolina game the night before. Needless to say, Steve impressed upon me much more than a love for Carolina basketball. In introductory lectures to undergraduates, I opened with a quote from Michel Montaigne in his essay on the education of children. And the quote is, the most difficult and important problem confronting human knowledge seems to be that of the right rearing and education of children. Later in the essay, Montaigne explains various aspects of the type of teacher, mentor, tutor one should seek out for their children and the type of learning that he finds most suitable. And I'm going to read a bit from this essay. Let an honest curiosity be instilled in him, so that he may inquire into everything. His instruction should be given him sometimes verbally, sometimes by book. Sometimes his tutor will put into his hands the author most suitable for the part of his instruction. Sometimes he will give him the marrow and the substance of the volume ready prepared. And if he is not himself familiar enough with books to find all the fine passages in them that suit his purpose, some man of letters can be associated with him, who can supply him with the necessary provisions to be dealt and dispensed to this pupil. After one-on-one meetings with Steve during my first year, I would generally spend an additional 10 to 15 minutes perusing his library. Steve would go back to emails or other responsibilities, and he'd respond when I'd ask him about this author or that author. I carried one of his books with me for the duration of my graduate training. It's The Emergence of Symbols, Cognition and Communication in Infancy by Elizabeth Bates. I don't remember whether he explicitly recommended the book or whether I encountered it in another text that he had recommended. I don't think that part's that important. Liz had drafted a beautiful inscription at the beginning for Steve, and this had made an important impression on me, the connection to the scientific community. And this is where I come to the crux of Steve's influence on me. He fostered an environment for a country boy from rural Idaho, potato country, to be part of a larger intellectual and scientific tradition. I'm sure there are plenty of mentors who can provide the content and the training and basics of experimental design and examples, model how to run a research study or run a research lab. Steve taught me how to be a member of the academy. And this is an academy of people. And, looking out across all of the individuals here, those of you who know Steve in the academic setting know that he was the collaborator's collaborator. And this was very important for me, Steve's impression of the social decorum of this intellectual and scientific community. I had not met someone with a PhD until I was 16 or 17 years of age. The first person I encountered was an agronomist who had moved to my little farming community to work for a fertilizer company. This was not an environment that I knew or a tradition that I was familiar with. Steve was an exceptional scientist, teacher, mentor, advocate, administrator, but first and foremost, he was a model citizen. As a graduation present, my partner at the time, now wife, and another undergraduate mentee of Steve's gave me my own copy of The Emergence of Symbols. We regularly toast to Liz Bates, who served as a catalyst for some cascade of events that led Steve to take a bet on a naive Idaho boy and invite me to UNC, which subsequently brought us together. While a bit too audacious to assume that I am or will be ever capable of standing on the shoulders of giants, Steve provided the scaffolding for me to begin the climb. I think of Steve often in my own mentoring, asking myself, what Reznickian advice can I give? I hope to be half the mentor that Steve was to my own trainees. My remarks have focused on Steve's influence as a mentor. But he was also my friend, and for that, I will always be thankful.
Steve Farmer is Steve's colleague and friend.
It was my great and everlasting fortune to spend many hours with Steve in committee meetings at UNC. Because you're laughing, I know you know already that the phrase everlasting fortune and the phrase committee meeting do not often appear together in the same sentence. But any meeting where Steve was a place I wanted to be. Steve's voice was never the loudest voice, but it was often the wisest, and it was always the most humane. No matter the subject, no matter how strongly he felt about it, Steve was always generous to others, including and especially those with whom he disagreed. Steve was always speaking up to people. In this, as in just about everything that truly counted, he was an example for me and for all of us. Now, I was luckier to spend even more time with Steve in one-on-one meetings after hours. And to tell you the truth, these after-hours meetings weren't really meetings, they were meetings. And we held them over a beer at a local bar. We did talk business at these meetings because Steve loved the university and he knew it well, and he had many ideas that he thought would make it better. Many of his ideas found their way into the life of the university, and they improve the lives of students to this day. Now, some of his other ideas, for example, abolishing tenure, he knew would never make it out of the barroom. But even those ideas grew out of his great respect for his students and his love for his colleagues and his deep conviction that the university exists not for itself, but for the people it serves. But we didn't just talk about business at those meetings. It was in one of those conversations that Steve told me he'd met a woman, walked with her for hours longer than he expected, and come away believing that he had found someone special, someone to love. And it was in another of those meetings that he told me Leah had met a wonderful man named John. And it was in another that he told me how glad he was to have found a son in Aaron. And in still others that he told me how much he admired his father and his mother, and how much he loved his sisters and their families. And it was in still others that he told me of his illness and of his determination to live his life to the fullest until the day he would have to leave us. In talking about his illness, and more generally about life, Steve sometimes called himself a stoic. I think he admired calm, the composed mind in the face of misfortune. And I know he wanted to live his life deliberately and thoughtfully, and in service to those who depended on him, and especially to those he loved. So here are the words of Marcus Aurelius. Accept the things to which fate binds you, and love the people with whom fate brings you together, and do so with all your heart. Steve accepted the things to which fate bound him, and he did so with extraordinary grace and courage. And more important, Steve loved the people with whom fate brought him together, and he did so with all his heart. How lucky we were to have been among those people. and how blessed. And now, even now, as we mourn, how grateful.
Finally, Sister Celia Brown.
So it's my natural place in our family for me to correct my sister. But I have to set the record straight. It would have been a Coca-Cola, not a glass of milk with that bologna sandwich. Important clarification. I've had quite a few days to try to synthesize my entire lifetime with Steve. A daunting task. And as I've thought about it, I've thought, as the rabbi said, we've all been ripped off by Steve's early death. But those who have lost the most time is the youngest generation. Leah, John, Aaron, Meredith, Ruthie, Daniel, Ellis, Joycey, the Adler and Aftel cousins, and all the others of their generation who have a long life ahead of them and need to keep Steve very close. So I offer to you, after all these remarkable accomplishments, a few of Steve's most important attributes to hold on to forever. There are three I will talk about: his curiosity, his sense of community, and his commitment. Curiosity showed up early. There was a chemistry lab in our basement. In the garden up in the yard, there was some sort of an elaborate irrigation system that Steve developed. His favorite outing was to Wiley School Creek to explore the wonders that lay beneath the rocks. He recently shared with me a letter I wrote to him at tween camp with Cousin Larry, where I reported dutifully that Plant A was doing better than Plant B. Curiosity was the foundation of Steve's work, his lifetime in science and in academics. But as Barbara said, it also showed up in his deep interest in the weather forecast, and more recently in the birds in the backyard. So to those of you who I want to remember Steve, yes, he was brilliant, but you don't have to be brilliant to change the world. You just have to be curious. Ask questions, explore, seek answers, as Steve would have. Community. Steve had a strange ability to gather people. Strange because he was actually innately very shy. He was an introvert. It didn't fit with his personality, but he figured out how to overcome it. It manifested itself in our early years with Mead Hall, a gathering place in my family basement that was filled with rock and roll and beer and black light posters. It became the hangout for our high school friends for years. And yes, it was recorded in a dutifully kept log of everyone who came. As you'd expect, and it is still around, that log. Steve convened people in college at Granville Towers and at 606 Hillsborough Road, where his friends always found a welcome place. And other things. We won't go there. You have heard details about Steve's collaborations, the organizations, the societies Steve spearheaded or joined. Steve's sense of community blossomed at Carolina. So to those of you who go on into the future, like Steve, make people comfortable, bring people together, join things up, and good things will come from it. Finally, commitment. What Steve did, he did with passion. He completed things. He finished things. His love for music began in early years from the clarinet to the saxophone and the marching band at R.J. Reynolds. It took Steve and Dan and Larry Adler to Woodstock. It took him to an amazing collection of records and musical instruments. And finally, his love of his harmonica, which with the help of his graduate students, he was able to enjoy even without the use of his hands. His commitment to the Tar Heels was known to all. But he didn't just observe. He became active in the student athletic world and made life better for student athletes. Of course, the most important part of that love for the Heels was basketball. And during this last season, he was careful to record the very late games that he couldn't stay up for so he could watch them without interruption in the morning. It wasn't a blind loyalty to the Tar Heels because there was no lack of clear point of view about some of the failings of some members of the coaching staff. Player here or there, or a play miscalled. Steve's commitment meant he delivered on his promises. What he said he would do, he did. He was aided by the most extraordinary organizational skills, the lists, the calendars, the reminders. He came through. His students knew his loyalty in the most profound way. One just wrote to Donna this week, "Steve always had our back." The academic world knew Steve's commitment. He finished that last book, and he was determined to do so. His family and friends knew his commitment. His love was unconditional. We watched with amazement and joy as he shared his love with Mom and Dad, with all of us, and of course, how proud he was of Leah and happy to have John in her life. And most, of course, his devotion to Donna and hers to him, the most wonderful and pure evidence of commitment. So if you want to honor Steve, and if you want to remember Steve, I encourage you to think about his curiosity, to think about how he gathered people together, to think about his commitments. His legacy and his influence will endure.
Unambiguous was a word I heard just before we came in from my study to begin this service, this collection of tributes to an extraordinary human being, one who I feel blessed to have known a little bit and indeed robbed of the chance to have gotten to know much better for the years to come. Unambiguous, in the context was the experiment that he was running on himself, the illness, even the illness which he hated. He, of course, wished it were different, but he felt there was something about being a scientist with this disease that would allow him to have some insight. And as his body progressively failed him, his mind stayed sharp, observing what was happening. Hearing that observation, I thought about another person stricken with this illness whose journey along its path was made famous in a book a few years ago. I'm thinking of Morrie Schwartz. And of the story that he tells his biographer, Mitch Albom, near the end of Tuesdays with Morrie, about the clarity that he had gotten over the course of his illness, about death and what follows. Morrie tells Mitch a story about a little wave bobbing along in the ocean, having a grand old time. He's enjoying the wind and the fresh air until he notices the other waves in front of him crashing against the shore. "My God, this is terrible," the wave says. "Look what's going to happen to me." Then along comes another wave. It sees the first wave looking grim, and it says to him, "Why do you look so sad?" The first wave answers, "You don't understand. We're all going to crash. All of us waves are going to be nothing. It's terrible." The second wave says, "No, you don't understand. You're not a wave. You're part of the ocean." El Malei Rachamim is the prayer in our Jewish tradition in which we acknowledge that truth, that we are not waves, but we are part of the ocean. The metaphor we use is not that of water, but of a bundle. It's Tzror HaChaim, it's called, the bundle of life. Think of it as the rising up of an independent being, this body-soul combination known as Steve, which comes into the world, as each of us do, for a brief time or a little bit longer, and then is subsumed back into the Tzror HaChaim, the neshama, the soul returning to its source. It's one of the ways we imagine, we hope, we dare to believe that we live on. There are so many others, and you've heard them today. We live on in the memory of people who were close to us and love us and continue to feel our presence. We live on in the generations, Steve will, in the generations of students that follow him, his curiosity becoming their curiosity. We live on in the kindness. We live on in the goodness that each of us will perform thinking about Steve. And so I invite you, if you're able to rise. As I first chant and then we read together, El Malei Rachamim, God full of compassion. El Malei Rachamim, Shochein Hameromim, Hametzei Menucha Nechona, Tachat Kanfei HaShechinah, B'mahalot Kedoshim U'Tehorim, Kezohar Harakia Mazhirim, Et Nishmat Yakireinu, Shehalach Le'olamo, Began Eden Tehei Menuchato, Ana Baal Harachamim, Yastirehu Beseter Kenafav Le'olamim, B'yitzror HaChaim, Et Nishmato, Adonai Hu Nachalato, V'yanuach B'shalom Al Mishkavo, V'nomar Amen. Together. God, whose fullness is compassion, this one dwelling on high, Grant perfect peace under the wings of your presence, in the holy and pure heights, like the heaven's radiant splendor, to the soul of Steve Reznick, who has gone on his way. Let Eden be his portion. Please, O God of compassion, protect him in the cover of your presence forever. May his soul be bound up in the bond of eternal life. May God be his inheritance. May he rest in peace. And together we say, Amen. We have one more prayer to offer together. El Molei Rachamim is the prayer for the dead. This is the prayer for the living. It's called Kaddish. In one of those beautiful tributes that came out over the last year that Donna sent along, Steve describes himself as a meliorist, someone who always wants to see the world as something that can be made better, and who feels that it's his role to make it better, to make it so. Kaddish is the prayer of a meliorist religion. It speaks about how we can make this world a better place, a place of peace, a place of unity, a place of grace and kindness, a place that would make Steve proud of us. Let's say together, Yit Gadal v'Yit Kadash Shemei Rabbah V'Almad Yivarach Yirutei V'Yamlich Malchutei V'Chayechon U'V'Yomechon U'V'Chayei D'Chol Beit Yisrael Ba'agala U'V'Zman Kariv V'Imru Amen. Yehei Shemei Rabbah Mevarach Le'alam U'Lalmei Almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yitaleh v'yithalal shemei d'kudsha b'richu le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata damiran v'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shalama rabba min shemaya V'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. May the one who creates harmony above make peace for us, for all Israel, for all that lives and breathes. And let us say, Amen.